We are so excited to welcome back Luis Mojica, an incredible somatic practitioner, podcast host, and founder of Holistic Life Navigation. We first spoke with him about fawn and sexual fawn, and today we are diving into deep waters again, exploring our relationship to trauma, links between trauma and autoimmune, shame response and boundaries, and so much more. This episode, we're going a little bit deeper into some of our own experiences. We will discuss early childhood sexual abuse, not in detail, but it will be mentioned. You are the expert of your own nervous system. If this feels unsupportive for your growth, out of sync with your capacity today, feel free to skip this one and we will catch you next week. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace, a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide. And I'm also an educator for the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification.
And I'm your co-host, Elisabeth Christoph, founder of brainbase.com, an online community where we get together to use applied neurology and somatics for nervous system health, behavior change, and resilience. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification course. One of the first things that I wanted us to talk about a little bit was just kind of our relationship to trauma. And, we all are obviously people that are like in the work, and the listeners are often in the work, and I've been exploring, and that I've seen you exploring a lot in your social and in the newsletters that I read from you, is sort of this minimum effective dose with the healing work, and not necessarily always feeling like we have to go so far deep into the experience to get the benefits of some of that healing. And in one of your, I think it was a recent newsletter, you said, or maybe it was a social post, PTSD is the experience of the body remembering and expecting threat, focusing on my past traumas only worsened symptoms, feeling where I was now completely transformed. Feeling where I was now completely transformed my body and mind. And so that kind of relationship between, yes, we need to process some, but also there's this nuance of also allowing ourselves to be present and start to move beyond that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you said that I love. It's so funny when someone reads a quote of myself back to me. I'm like, oh, I love that.
It's a good quote.
Sounds so self-involved, but there's such a truth to what you're saying about the like titrating small amounts instead of diving into the experience. Because what's fascinating is I'm thinking about this a lot. Like when we feel something suddenly, like sudden anxiety, sudden overwhelm, whatever it is, in that moment we have the capacity for that thing that's coming up then. And so that's the way I work somatically with myself and with people, is what's coming up now means that's what it's like, dosing you. That's what you can handle. When you go looking for it and you're kind of like forcing yourself into the experience to kind of release the experience, it's so often we can tend to go beyond our capacity. Because one, just like you said in the quote, the experience isn't happening now. The sensation left over from it is happening now. So when you leave where you are now for the experience, you leave your anchor of what actually lets you even feel what's still left in you. And that's, for me, what I was writing about, how my symptoms of PTSD worsened because I wasn't learning how to feel where I was and work from there. I was going straight back, to the most painful place over and over again, and losing all my resourcing.
It's a really powerful reframe and perspective to take that from, because I love what you're saying about those sudden feelings are the dose at which we have the capacity for. And we have this conversation a lot with our clients and on the podcast about like, what is capacity? And some days my capacity is, I have a lot of capacity, right? It's more than it typically is. And there's some days where I don't have the capacity for much at all. And have found that like, in my trauma healing, I can get into these loops of, like we were saying, like sometimes I go too far back and it's like, no, that's not what my body needs right now. And so understanding, first of all, even how to feel into my body and making it safe enough to be in the present moment and having this experiences and being able to cultivate compassion
Mm-hmm.
is also another thing that really helps with my capacity. and really about the balance I think that it takes when we go into these deeper spaces, and just knowing that, like, okay, as my capacity expands, it pushes out a little bit further. And then I kind of have to swim in these waters for a little while, understanding where my capacity is. So I'm just curious about how you find the boundaries of your capacity and how you know when you have expanded into another place.
Yeah. Well, just even to feel that last thing you just said, expanded into another place, and relate that to your share. Even when I expand into another place, it's temporary. You know, like capacity doesn't just, in my experience, doesn't just set. It's like a
Mm-mm.
constant spiral of, oh, it's expanding now, it's contracting, it's expanding now, it's contracting. So what helps me kind of gauge, am I in an expansive place or am I in a contracted place? It's really the sensations of constriction. You know, when I feel my shoulders constrict, when my jaw is constricting, when my solar plexus or my breath is constricted, that's my body saying I'm at capacity. It's literally like pulling away from the world. And so, trauma language, trauma response language, I'm going into freeze or collapse often when that's occurring. Usually collapse when I'm pulling inwards, and so that constrictionness starts. That then turns into collapse, which is when we're just kind of playing dead and have no energy and feeling exhausted. That constriction is a really early signal for me of protection. You know, constriction to the body is protection, is protecting itself. So if there's capacity, it's not going to protect itself against the dishes or the laundry or the bills. You know, it's not congruent. Like if I'm outside and there's a bear running at me, I need protection in that moment. There's a congruent threat. But when my life is overwhelming me, or I'm remembering something that was threatening or almost threatening, and I'm constricting, it's incongruent with where I am, which means I lack capacity for what's around me because the actual source isn't happening now. So I'm in like this weird purgatory. But anyway, not to go too deep in that yet, but the capacity piece for me, tracking that really is through constriction and softness. The parts of me that are soft have a lot of capacity for charge and sensation. The parts of me that are constricted, they don't have a lot of capacity for charge or sensation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is so important, and it can be such a journey in the beginning to even be able to feel like, when am I tensing, when am I bracing, with those softer, more subtle signals of the nervous system and the body before we push ourselves into really big protective outputs. And I think so many people, myself included, when I started to learn about my trauma and understanding the impact that that had, and I was facing all of my autoimmune symptoms, it was like you want to get in there and you want to explore and fix it. And I found myself pushing way too far, too fast, too soon, really exceeding my minimum effective dose, and facing all these big protective outputs of my nervous system, rash and joint swelling and dissociation. And interestingly, like, the more I took a step back and started to work with my nervous system daily, regularly, in these little doses, I was able to start to recognize those signals earlier on before I would push into that. And then also too, that regular work with the nervous system did expand my capacity. And something that's really interesting and surprising for people that comes up is sometimes they're like, I'm in this work, I'm getting better, and now I'm starting to remember more, and like more is coming up because I have the capacity in my system. And then sometimes it gets murkier and harder in this other way as our capacity expands, because we're facing and remembering and feeling some of those things for the first time that our body didn't let us before.
Yeah, that's an important piece of the puzzle when people go into this work. Is there's the logical idea where, well, I'm doing all the work, I'm doing better, I should feel really good. But embodiment isn't synonymous with peace. You know, embodiment is I'm feeling whatever's in there. And I think we think that embodiment suddenly means joy and ease and peace, but it doesn't. It's like peace means peace, but embodiment means I'm feeling what lives in me. So when you have decades, which a lot of people have decades of things living in them they haven't felt, and suddenly they're starting to touch into those parts. That's a lot of sensational information that's been dormant, right? And kind of hidden from you, especially behind numbness and freeze. So when that freeze starts to thaw and the numbness starts to get some prickles to it, it's super uncomfortable. And I say exactly what you said to my students all the time. When you're feeling so much more discomfort, it's because your body has more capacity. And just because you have more capacity doesn't mean you have to focus on what's coming up. You can honor that it's there and enjoy life a little bit and then come back to it. It doesn't mean now I have to just head on deal with this so I'm free of it
Yes.
someday.
And that can be so hard. I mean, that can be really hard back to balance, like a really hard way to
Yeah.
balance people's lives, right? To because when it comes to embodiment, if you haven't been around your life for decades and now all
Hmm.
of a sudden you're in your life, that can be very scary because it's like, oh, I don't like this. I don't even want this in my life. But yet you could have been engaging in it and with it for like a really long time, and then it's like you have to make these changes, and it usually is really small changes, or well, it could be a massive shift all at one time. But it can be pretty scary to experience your life in your body when you haven't understood it. And when Elisabeth spoke to the more the more regulated we get, the more safety we cultivate in the body, the more that comes up. And often the more that comes up is coming through the body because there wouldn't be a conscious memory mostly of it. So truths are revealing themselves into the body, more into a conscious space. And it's conscious, but it's a body consciousness. And that
Hmm.
can be a really that's challenging to even bridge. Like I'm feeling something, something feels like it's the truth, but I actually have no recollection or memory of it. And yet this has set the subconscious undercurrent in my body
Hmm.
for these protective responses and this emotional undertones. And so, can we talk a little bit about bridging the mind and the body experience from the somatic memory into a cognitive place? Or
I mean, yeah, there's a whole other nuance you're adding, which is, do I have capacity for sensation and memory? It's like
mm,
sometimes I don't. And so I think when we have the felt sense of something, but we can't quite pin the experience to it, I don't have capacity for those images. It's like when you say protection, one way I believe the body protects us is to remove image. And
yeah.
so it leaves sensation, but it removes image. And that's so confusing. And I think in a linear way of thinking, we think that the two must be married to heal it. And I don't think that's necessary. I think when you feel sensation, that's your validation right there. You don't have to know why it's there. It's just about, okay, my chest is constricted. Can I sit with this constriction? And my favorite thing is not just like you're sitting in it, but you're actually letting the constriction join you in the room. Because when I look around the room, I can visually see non threat. I can visually see beauty and ease and stillness. And so my constriction, when it meets and connects to that, that's for me when self-regulation starts happening because it integrates to my current moment. Like when we say updating the nervous system, it updates. Now, image is very helpful because someone's, if I say, well, I'm constricted, and it's taking me right back to last week when I argued with my dad, right? And I have this like image and this memory of the situation that's connected to that. That's helpful because I can say, is he here right now? No. And I can feel that. And I can say, okay, what was happening for me then that's not happening now? And I can begin the uncoupling work. And I used to think that I had to help people get image to uncouple, but I realized you don't need that. You can uncouple just with sensation, again, by letting it integrate to where you are currently. So for me, the sensations show you the image if you have capacity for it. If
Yeah.
someone listening to this feels a pain or an emotion they don't know why they're feeling, if you lay down in a bed for 2 minutes and hold it with your hands, it will show you something. It will show you a need, a memory, something it wants you to do, a crying movement. Like something will emerge from that. It's just not always clear or makes sense.
Yeah.
I love this way of starting to understand how we can trust those sensations and start to work with them, to accept them, to allow them into the space without necessarily having to have a cognitive, logical explanation or memory associated with it. And what you were saying about we sometimes we don't have capacity for the image, and I think that's really important. We just did an episode on memory and somatic memory, and we talked about how very young children, they don't actually have the proteins in in the brain to lay down long-term memory. And so there won't be a cognitive memory of things that happen before a certain age. And then to also understand, in addition to that, there can be things that happen later in life that we still don't have the capacity to recall those images. Maybe we were really dissociated, maybe we've blocked out a lot of that. And to really understand that that is completely possible, and it's still okay to start to trust that those experiences are real because they're really happening in your body, and that you can absolutely still work with it in that way is really powerful.
Yeah, it
I'm really
is.
glad you spoke to that.
Even when you were saying that, I was getting that awareness that some people have capacity for the image and don't have capacity for the sensation. Think about, I'm sure a lot of people you worked with, they'll tell you over and over again about horrific things, but they can't feel them. So it's really about assessing in our clients and ourselves, okay, what do we have room to receive? And sometimes it's image, sometimes sensation, sometimes it's both, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the inflammation that one is experiencing in the body, that it can be hard to make the connections, especially I've found in working with clients, and it's my own story, that I was very young
Mhm.
when I experienced a body boundary violation. I wouldn't have started to, like Elizabeth was saying, have the genes, the protein genes in place to even record this memory. And it took decades, probably close to 35 years, for me to figure out really what was this sort of like what was happening in my body, what happened to my body, why was I using my body, why was I giving my body away, what was there. And then I think, coupled with the emotional neglect that I think unintentionally forms when you are hiding something like that as a little one, like you've had a sexual body boundary violation by, by a family member or someone close to you, and then you don't go home and tell your parents because you don't know how to say that, or maybe you don't have the words to
Yeah.
say that. You might not even be verbal, and then there's like this level of emotional neglect that happens as a byproduct of not having the truth shared to a primary that you trust or a caregiver that you trust. And so I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it's just occurred to me that emotional neglect is something that could be perceived, but with there's an early sexual trauma, that's a heightened other experience for someone.
Mhm. Well, it's two things that come out for me when you speak. I'm hearing the emotional neglect. I'm hearing the inflammation, and for me, the emotional neglect piece, it's an interesting term because I think it's almost like, can you neglect something you're not even told happened, right? And what I find, and that's how the body experiences it as neglect. And I think about my early experiences of sexual assault and being molested and things that happened before I could make sense of it. And I never told my parents. I didn't bring it to them because, one, I didn't have, like you said, I didn't have words for it. Two, one, I dissociated from, so I didn't even. To me, it didn't happen when it was over. It just left. But the amount of shame and kind of confusion around it just didn't even feel like I wanted anyone to reflect that back to me. So it was almost emotional immaturity, not in a negative way, but because I was too young to even hold it, to know I needed to bring it somewhere, and then it wasn't witnessed. And what I'm learning more and more is trauma really is when these big things happen and you're unable to be witnessed in them. Like there's a lack of connection during it, because plenty of traumatic events occur for people and they don't become traumatized because they have connection through them. But there's something about that loneliness and isolation and how the body starts curling in on itself because it doesn't have another body to kind of awaken it from that spell of something really overwhelming and shocking occurring. And that to me is where the inflammation piece comes in, because when there's this chronic constriction and bracing because you're expecting threat and you're trying to protect yourself, that adrenalized state is an inflammatory state. There's a biochemist I work with, and she's taught me that when you have a lot of adrenaline in your bloodstream from stress and PTSD and trauma, that you have more hydrogen in your bile. So every time you're digesting fats or food and it creates bile from your liver and gallbladder, you have all this hydrogen moving through your intestinal tract, which burns the lining of your gut. And when your gut lining is burned, you have not just an inflammatory response, but you get leaky gut, which creates systemic inflammation through your body. So not only is the tension itself like physically creating inflammation in the joints because the pressure it puts on them, but then there's this whole systemic gut inflammation that happens from the hydrogen from having excess adrenaline. So it's fascinating how that adrenalized state that we're alone with after a trauma and we don't have connection, the state itself biochemically is an inflammatory state.
Wow, that's really fascinating to think about, and I'm really glad that we're going here, because this whole season we're really looking at like the underpinnings and the intersections of complex trauma and then physical health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and trying to really get deep into where these things overlap. And I I am someone who, like, incest is part of my story, autoimmune is part of my story, and I think a lot about the inflammatory response, and to hear that about that deep level of gut inflammation is really interesting to think about. And then just like a bigger systemic picture too of my body being primed to protect me from injury through inflammation, because it's preparing me to be in a situation where I might get hurt, and that is part of my healing process. And so that inflammatory response getting really hyperactive, and that patterning staying. And then there's something that I think too about early body boundary violations, that you are being violated internally,
Mm.
and that is a way for your body to protect you and set a boundary when you cannot. And
Hmm.
so that replaying then when there's other boundary violations in my life now that have nothing to do with that deep internal violation, triggering that same inflammatory response, even when it's just like a work boundary or something small, or somebody looks at me in the grocery store, the reactivity of that inflammatory response playing out over and over again.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you think of inflammation, it's like the same thing as an airbag going off in a car. It's protection, just like you're suggesting. And so when we think about being inflamed, it's the body's literally ballooning up to protect itself from something coming in. And I think of this a lot as far as allergies go, because when, let's say, like pollen's in the air and is going into your airways, and your body has a histamine response, and you get inflamed and you get sneezy and watery, all these responses are the body trying to protect itself against something invading it. And so when you've actually been invaded, when you've had like a physical disturbance to your body, in this case sexually, sexual trauma, and there's an invasion, the actual site of invasion, as well as your stomach, your chest, your joints, your jaw, like so many parts of you will have an inflammatory response, just as if you ate food you were allergic to, because the body's saying keep out this thing that's coming in that I didn't, consent or was open to entering my body. And so I find that important because, shock trauma we think of as a physical thing. People have shock trauma from the parents screaming at them suddenly. It's like the scream got in even. But in this case, when we're talking about sexual trauma, there's usually some kind of unwanted, forced penetration or touch that wasn't welcomed. And yeah, the inflammatory response is part of the body trying to protect itself.
I'm actually trying to heal a leaky gut now and have been at it for, I mean, it's taking some time. I'm in my second year of figuring this out. And I was reading something that said that you could actually heal your gut lining in 7 days, but
Mm.
you could only do that really if like you didn't have this shame response. You weren't having these
Mm.
emotional responses and this inflammation to the emotional response in the body, and the inflammation of this, all this protection that's been going on for 40, like,
Hmm.
who knows how long, 40 something years. And so it's been really eye opening to look into my gut, to look into my hormones, the adrenals, my thyroid, and how my body has been shaped by the 20 years prior to it. I am really feeling the effects of it now, so much later, but
Mm.
it's really a game, not a game, but like there's a daily conscious effort
Hmm.
to understand my emotional response to something, try to understand, like, trying to have just a conscious awareness of where I am at moments during the day when I feel those hits, when I get those activations. And back to capacity, sometimes it's really overwhelming that I even understand my nervous system
Hmm.
as well as I do. And I think
Hmm.
that gets pretty triggering in a healing process.
Well, it's interesting because I was just so I do this 6-month nutrition program. I'm in the middle of, I'm in the beginning of it right now. And what we do is I teach people how to marry somatics with nutrition. And what you just said reminded me of exactly what we talked about in the Q&A today, which someone was saying, like, I eat perfectly, I'm trying to heal my gut, it's not working. And this was something I experienced so much as a nutritionist. Is really one of the things that got me into somatic psychology, because I wanted to understand what's the biochemistry beyond these events, because the food is not helping these people. So what else is happening? And it's funny, like when you think of eating food, we eat all of our experiences. Like every experience has some catalytic hormonal response. Every experience, whether it's joyful or painful or stressful, there's a hormone being created, which means the body has to physically metabolize a chemical from every experience. So what I say to people that say, I'm eating perfectly, I'm trying to heal my gut, or I'm trying to get rid of whatever it is that's not working. There's two questions, and one is, how do you relate to the food? If you're eating the healthiest food from a constricted, overwhelmed place, it doesn't even digest well. So it's not a health food at that point. It's not going to heal anything. And then the second question is what you just said. How do I relate to my life? Like, what are the reactions my body's physically, not even me, I'm having, my body's having to life around me, that's creating that, like I was saying, that hydrogenated bile, if you will, where there's this excess amount of hydrogen and adrenaline, and it's inflaming my gut. That can happen even though the environment is seemingly perfect and nutrition is good and life's going well. If your body's in a habit of constricting against life, you're going to be in that adrenalized state, and it's going to impair your gut usually and your digestion. So I think it's important, those two questions.
So important. And there's so much there in both of those things. One is like the stress state that we're in, and like are the ways that we're trying to heal ourselves with the food, and all of this adding more stress because it becomes very rigid, and that hypervigilance is transferred to that area, and then we're staying in that really adrenalized state as we're moving through that, and that is not going to be conducive to healing the gut health. And then also too, how we're moving through life. And one thing that I did really want us to explore, because I think we're three people who think about shame a lot. And as Jennifer and I have been researching this, we found a bunch of studies that look at shame, and there are higher markers of inflammatory cytokines in an emotional shame response that are produced.
Hmm.
And if we're someone who, gosh, with the food has so much like shame coupled with our relationship with food and the way that we use food, and then shame associated with our body and feeling the sensations, and then we have this pro-inflammatory response with the shame, and why that happens. These are all things I just would love to hear your thoughts on, about that inflammatory response with shame.
This is why I say shame is harder to metabolize than food. Because if you ate a whole chocolate cake at night and you're feeling so horrible about it, it's actually your shame about it that stays with you for weeks and months. It's not the cake. The cake is gone in like a day or two from your body. It has been metabolized. Our bodies are so efficient, they use up every last drop of whatever we eat. So it's gone. But what lasts is the shame. I think about my sexual assault. I think about how long the actual assault lasted compared to the decade or two of shame that came afterwards. The shame is something that's so interesting because it's not in physical form. It creates a physical experience physiologically, just like you're saying with the inflammatory response. But it doesn't have a visceral origin. It's a state of mind. It's like a way of witnessing yourself. So the shame is ongoing because it doesn't. I can drink a glass of water, the water's gone. There's endless shame that I can give myself. And when that's happening, again, there's this physiological response. And I believe one reason for that is one of my teachers recently was talking about this, how shame is a really helpful protective response when it's temporary, just like all the other trauma responses. And someone might hear that and think, well, how on earth is shame protecting? But if you think about like what shame does to you, shame creates a physiology of freeze, and it kind of curls you inwards. It makes you want to be invisible. Like no one feels shame and wants to be seen, right? So you feel shame and you want to hide. Now, why would it be helpful? I'm going into the lunchroom and there's, let's say, like a bully in the cafeteria at the table, and he made fun of me an hour ago. And the shame I feel when I see him pulls me inward, and maybe I have a chance of not being noticed. So, in these relational moments where it makes sense, shame serves you to be invisible. When I'm shaming myself or I'm living in the shame, then I'm living in that physiology of freeze and shutdown. And freeze, even though it seems like you're not doing anything, it's like running a race internally. You're still pumping adrenaline. Your heart is still increased. Your breathing is shallow. You're constricted. Your blood pressure is high, even though you're really still. So living in that freeze state from the shame is why I believe there's an inflammatory response. And what we eat and the drugs we take and the shows we watch and how we try to cope with the shame just adds to it.
Gosh, there's so much there that's coming up for me, honestly, especially when I think about the shame. Well, like first of all, I want to go back to the freeze response, because freeze response, like when you said it, it's like running a marathon in place. Like you're
Yeah.
just running and running and running. You're not going anywhere. And these two are often so coupled together. And then I think about some of the habits I got in. I think, from the early body boundary violation into like teenage years and starting to feel sexual and starting to feel like that was, getting explorative, like getting exploratory, and even being somewhat promiscuous into my 20s and whoever, however, whenever, and how that perpetuated a shame response. We talked about sexual fawn last time we were together, and how I was just calling it in. Shame was a self-fulfilling prophecy, just based on the way that I was living my life. Like you said, the TV shows you watch, the drinking, the drugs, the sexual giving away, and it's well, back to the gut disorder, right? Like all of that is it's going to carry on, and
Hmm.
it just creates a lot of havoc in the body.
Hmm. I think it's important to make the connection that shame is stressful. We see shame as just shameful or maybe painful or I don't want to be seen. But at the biochemical state, it's stressful. It's stress. Shame stresses out the body. So
Yeah.
when your lifestyle becomes shameful to yourself, which mine did as well, especially when you emerge from unprocessed young developmental sexual trauma, then when you're a teenager and an adult, the way you have sex is traumatizing to you. And that's exactly what I experienced. Like your fetishes, your reflexes, the way you seek someone, the person you seek out, it all for me was just a magnet for more sexual violation and trauma. And so then
Hmm.
your lifestyle becomes shameful to you, which means your lifestyle becomes stressful to you. So you're just in this kind of closed circuit of stress, and everything builds up on that. And so I find it helpful for people to understand that their shame is actually stressing out their body, and that extra layer helps us understand why we have so many syndromes and symptoms when you have that kind of shame. And it can be subconscious. So most people don't even consciously know they're shaming themselves. And then when they do somatic work and they start going into that unconscious place through the sensations, they realize, wow, when I look in the mirror, the things I say to myself subconsciously and how that lands in my body is really physically painful.
Hmm.
I think it's very important to really recognize the heavy stress load that it does actually put on our bodies to stay in that state. And also, as you were talking about too, to recognize all of these things, they are protective responses. They're adaptive at some point, including the stress response that comes with the shame. And then it's that place where it becomes chronic,
Hmm.
where we start to experience all of the really quite harmful effects from that. And I want to talk about how this relates to boundaries and body boundaries and all of that. But before we dive into all of that, I do want to offer people like, how did we start to repattern this? What were some of the first steps in that? Because I think it can be really overwhelming to hear all of this too, and realize the chronic nature of these states that you're stuck in. And I don't want it to totally overwhelm. What were some of the ways that we kind of started repatterning?
We talked earlier about being witnessed, and that was a really powerful, that was probably some of the most powerful work and some of the deepest work that I did, because it was so scary to be witnessed when I'd been in isolation and been in constriction for so long. And it was with Elisabeth that we really started going into this deeper work together. And I would allow her to see my fear, to hear what my core subconscious limiting beliefs were about myself. And I got honest in front of her about my anger and about my grief and my rage. And I had never let anyone in. And so that was really the first step for me, was I can be honest with somebody. There's somebody in front of me that I trust is going to hear me, is going to see me, and is going to create a safe space for me for the allowance of these emotions to come up. Like, I have someone who's not going to turn away. And
Mm-hmm.
I really created a daily practice of taking time to be in my body, to listen to it. If I feel an activation now, and it took time to get to where I am now, of course, but okay, I'm feeling this. Do I have time and space to explore this, to sit with this? What tools do I have in my box to settle the nervous system right now, so that I can be in a space of conscious awareness, like you said, to just lay on the bed for a moment and hold the place of me, the age of me, even if something is coming up, to just say, this feels like this. And like we're saying, sometimes the body, when we allow the body time, we talk to it, we ask it questions, it does send us messages. And it may be something visual, or a word, or a sound, or a color, or a memory. And creating a safe practice around the allowance of the body to just be, and that I had the capacity and the space to meet it, and just staying with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the witnessing is what feels important to me there. Because when you were saying that, I was realizing my big repatterning came from writing music. And not everyone listening is able or wants to write music, but it was just one experience of witnessing, because my pattern was experience something painful, shut down, and binge eat, and just dissociate. And started interrupting that process was something painful, go to my room, close the door, write lyrics, and play something on the piano or guitar. So I was witnessing myself, because I didn't feel safe enough to be witnessed by a person yet. I wasn't where you were. And after years and years and years, I mean, to give people a realistic uh, setting, for me, I was starting when I was 15, and I didn't start deep therapy until I was 25, 26. So we're talking a decade that I really just sat with myself and witnessed these parts of myself and interrupted that one pattern. But by doing so, I had more capacity then to be witnessed by other people, because I felt less of a charge around my own experiences that I judged heavily. So the witnessing to me is a huge repatterning, especially when you think of trauma being something that results from the lack of witness when you're going through something. And then isolation is what ensues and kind of preserves the trauma response. Witnessing breaks that preservation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am going to have to jump in this witnessing thread too, because it's so important as you guys were speaking. And I was thinking about that, the witness, like being witnessed, like Jen was talking about, the witnessing of yourself and the creation that was able to come from that. And then I think for me also too was witnessing other people. And so like putting myself in communities where people were sharing and talking about these things, and then the isolation being chipped away at, so that I could see like other people have these emotions, other people have these things where they feel disgusting, or they have these big outbursts of rage, or they whatever, all the things that we experience, the narratives that go on in their mind. And I could start to see myself reflected back in that way. And there was a moment of realizing that all of these parts of the human experience are what really connect us. And that then, when I was experiencing it, I could have more self compassion, and I could also have this deeper understanding of like, this is what makes me part of the
Mhm.
collective, part of my tribe. And it was a totally different way to look at that emotional experience, I think.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
really good.
actually
Even when you
making
say
me kind of, oh, sorry. I'm actually
no,
getting
please.
emotional right now, actually, just listening, because I'm thinking, like, I don't think I understood how to have compassion for myself until I understood that someone had compassion for me,
Mm.
because I couldn't have that for myself.
Yeah.
That's what's so powerful to me about the witnessing is that piece. It's like we don't know how to do it. This is especially true for children, but it's also true for adults. But it's our nervous system literally requires someone mirroring us back to ourselves when we lose ourselves. Because trauma, by design, when you have a trauma response, you lose yourself. This other creature, this animal body takes over. So you're not even present for it. So you need someone that's not in that response that you can attune to, that's the opposite, like the counter vortex, right? And your body swings to that, and oh, that person's smiling, or a tear's coming down their eye while I tell them my experience. I never even felt anything from my own experience. And then something starts connecting really, really beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really powerful.
I was going to say when Elizabeth was talking about the weaving and feeling like she was part of the tribe again, but it's really what you just said. No, Jennifer, even while your tears were coming down, like my heart started to open. Like there's something just magical that happens when you witness somebody having just a natural experience, and that you start getting woven back together, to that connected place that we all share. And for me, when I started feeling that, it was this huge confirmation that there was nothing wrong with me,
Yeah.
and that was big, really big for me to actually believe there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah,
Mm.
because often we believe we're the only one experiencing it in the world. Like, I'm the only
Exactly.
one who feels this way. I'm the only one who sees it like this. And I'm the only one that
Mhm.
this happens to. And then
That's
back to
right.
the shame, right? Like, if I'm the only one that this happens to, I'm the bad one.
Hmm. Hmm. Especially true with childhood sexual assault. You really believe
Mhm.
I must have done something wrong. Like I'm the common denominator here. But then when
From
someone
the
has capacity
beginning.
from the get go, right? But when they have that capacity for me, like when someone's able to hold it without getting overwhelmed, even that was a huge one for me to because I didn't have access to people that didn't get easily overwhelmed and shut down.
Right.
So to see, oh, people actually had capacity to witness something really horrific gave me the ability to witness it in myself too. So it's such a service we provide to each other just by being human.
Mm. Yeah. I love that. Um, I guess kind of a strange segue because we're talking about being so connected. But I think also I wanted to segue a little bit into boundaries and how this all impacts our ability to set boundaries. And I think that there is some relevance to connection there because as we have the ability to set healthy boundaries, we actually can be more connected, right? When we have that, we know how to gauge the space that I need to be able to care for myself and witness another person. But I think that there is so much of this that when we think about the inflammation and the shame response and then our ability to move through the world and set appropriate boundaries, it's just something that has come up for me so much. And as I try to navigate setting boundaries, it feels really big. And I think some of that is just linked back to those early body boundary violations where the load of that, it just feels different than maybe some other people experience it.
When you said that, I got this real clarity that when you feel disconnected, especially growing up, I'll speak for myself. I felt so disconnected because of these experiences. I felt so othered. I felt so wrong that I then become desperate for any kind of attachment that I
Yeah.
break my own boundaries because I just want to be seen. So I don't care what you do, who you are, what you're saying to me. I'm not even going to think about how I feel about it because I just need to be connected with. And
Mhm.
so for me, it was terrifying to have boundaries because there was so much desperation in me to be attached. And Gabor Mate has this quote that I love where he says, "You'll always choose attachment over authenticity." And that's the fawning response. It's, I will fawn and perform to belong to you, even if I don't like what's happening. And that comes for me from that early disconnection of this thing happened. I feel othered, I feel hurt, I don't trust people, yet I crave connection because I require it to survive. So I'm going to have to learn to do whatever I can to get that. Boundaries then get overcoupled with, I'm going to lose everybody and everything. People are going to hate me. I'll never be loved if I say what I need or what I want. And so my personal experience with boundaries had to do with the fawning response. Fawning is designed to break your boundaries. So I broke my boundaries for years and years and years and years and years. And that got me relationships. The people in my life, they loved me because I did whatever they wanted. It's like a guarantee of being liked, right? And so to start saying things I didn't like, or saying no, or having issues or disagreements, that was terrifying because I equated that with losing everybody. But then once I felt so secure in myself and so self connected, I was so up for losing everybody if I had to. And then eventually finding people that had capacity for who I was and my boundaries, right?
For sure. That's relatable. It's like now it's like boundaries. Yes, I'm setting boundaries for all the reasons, all the
It's like
things. And
fun.
it's
It's
like,
like fun
take it
now.
or leave it. Like, I'm here. I got me. I'm safe. I'm in this body. And you're not going to make or break me in this. Like, if you leave me over this boundary, then what am I really losing? I'm only gaining
Mhm.
myself and gaining more trust within. And boundaries are so funny too, because we are literally a boundary. We're a
Mhm.
boundary as spirit in the body. All of the systems have boundaries to each other.
Mhm.
And so it's like feeling my internal boundaries and understanding that I am a system of boundaries really helped me to vocalize boundaries a little bit more,
Mhm.
or to
That's a
be
beautiful.
safer in that.
Yeah, when people ask me about what boundaries are, I always start by saying what you just said. It's the body, like your skin. It's
Mhm.
your bones, the things you can feel in little hairs on your skin. Like those are your literal boundaries that protect your organs
Yeah.
in your body. And
Yeah.
then the expression of your needs is just what we call setting a boundary. But it's really as simple as just, this is what I need.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really inspiring to me to listen to you guys because I'm not quite there yet. Like cognitively I am, and I've done so much work. I work with my vocals so much. I do all of this work to and it comes easier than it did. But even now, like there's times I've had to set some pretty big boundaries in terms of work stuff, and the somatic memory of the like terror of that is it's real. It's there for me, and so I'll set the boundary, and then like I'm down on the floor, the stuff is coming out, it feels truly life threatening.
Hmm.
And I guess like the positive to that is that I can really see it for what it is. I know that it's a somatic memory, it's an emotional flashback. I can be watching it with altitude at the same time, knowing that it will pass. And it also just, it feels like a lot sometimes. And so it's this process of, I think also too, as my capacity is expanded, more of that stuff can actually be released with it. And so I'm really hoping to get to that place where it's
Hmm.
like, whoa, I get the opportunity to set a boundary. But to be really honest, it feels terrifying, and most of the time still.
I'm really glad you said that because it's good that people hear the reality of things. And when you were saying about somatic memory, I was just thinking, those of us that have had sexual assault or abuse or relational abuse of any kind, the reason why most of us survived was because of fawning. So we're here because we let our boundaries be violated. That's the point of fawning, is your body says, okay, I don't like this, but I'm going to pretend to be okay with it so I don't get killed, so I don't lose my job, so I don't lose everything around me. So you literally have an understandable overcoupling that says, if I speak what I want, something bad will happen. Because at the time, it was probably something really bad would happen if you spoke the truth. So I just think it's good to honor that for you and for all of us.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
I know we say that there is no like hierarchy to the trauma that exists in the world, but listening to her right now and thinking of like, I guess just thinking of boundaries, right? And like her experience of boundaries and what I'm experiencing in boundaries. And do you think that sexual abuse is more pervasive than like the outputs and the way that sexual abuse continues to be experienced in a body is more stressful? And then under that, would incest be even more, like just more, another layer? I really feel like there's a deeper layer to boundaries when it comes to an incest survivor versus it's just
Hmm.
feels very different.
Agreed. I mean, there's so many parts there. One part that you're speaking to, I think, is the shame factor. If my dad screamed at me every morning, I don't have as much fear of saying to my friends, my dad yells at me. If my dad touched me every morning, I'd have a lot more fear and impulse to not share that with everybody, anyone maybe, because there's something so deeply shameful about being sexually touched or inappropriately touched, especially by a caretaker. Like when you compare sexual assault, which is horrible in and of itself, to incest, the difference is you're stuck with that person. That person is your parent or your cousin or your uncle or your grandparent, someone that you trust to get your attachment needs met by, especially as a child. So it's not only the situation itself, which is so confusing and overwhelming, but it's the ongoing compartmentalization of, okay, this person did something really weird, but now they're being really sweet and I'm hugging them and enjoying it. And one of my experiences was very similar to that of, I enjoy this person relationally. It wasn't a family member, it was somebody really close in our community. It was like, I enjoy this person relationally and like they're my friend and I trust them and they violated my body. Like, this is a strange thing for a kid to make sense of. And so to hold those two things is a lot of stress, to hold my love for you and my trust, and I actually enjoy being close to you. And then this other way we were close is very gross and disgusting to me. I don't know how to speak about it. And I think I did something wrong. That's particularly unique to the incested experience, or someone with there was a power dynamic involved, and there's two different sides of the relationship. Again, it's the stress factor for me of how confusing is it and how isolated am I in it, right? Rather than, my husband throws a glass at the wall and it scared me and I called my friend and told them. That's different again from someone in my family touched me inappropriately. There's things we're more likely to speak about and things we aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also to just to kind of weave this in to there's like a boundary component and then also like a visibility and a self-expression part to all of this that can also really come with that. And I was reading again, I don't know if this came from one of your newsletters or from an Instagram post, but talking about the fear that you used to have of being seen in front of an audience and how that like was really coupled back to those early experiences of molestation, and then learning to pendulate that to gradually begin to work with it was really the way to move through some of that response rather than just pushing through all the time. And I feel like that's kind of true maybe with the boundary setting and also with the visibility and these things that we do really want, but there has to be a dosing of that
Yeah.
that's appropriate so that our body can start to repattern and have a different response and we're not just replaying the same reaction over and over again.
That last part is exactly it for me. It's when I push through my own body's boundary, I'm reenacting the violation. So when I'm feeling something really big and my body's constricting and I'm like, nope, we're going to push through this. It's the same thing happening again. Different circumstance, but same physiology. Whereas I'm endlessly amazed. I do so many demos in my course and my membership when I do live stuff with people from all over the world, all different cultures, all different experiences. And everybody I sit with does the same thing. They have a constriction. The impulse is to somehow bypass it or fawn through it or kind of like judge it. The moment they lay the constriction down, literally let their head fall back on a chair, or they lay on the floor, they hold a pillow and they just support the constriction, not try to get rid of it, it starts transforming because they're honoring and supporting the body that wants to constrict for really good historical reasons. It's incongruent, meaning right now it doesn't make sense to the reality they're in the moment, but it did make sense at one point. So it's not invalid, it's just incongruent, right? It's a valid response from the past that's coming up during a moment it doesn't need to come up. So it's a confusion essentially. But when they settle and they hold and support the constriction, it's like magic happens. And every time I watch, I'm like, is it gonna happen this time? And it does, and I'm always blown away. So I
Do
wanted to
you
say that as you were speaking that piece.
do you think that this unsupported constriction and the pushing, do you think that adds to a level of burnout in the body where also then it of course leads on to lack of safety and visibility and business growth and ever in life?
Absolutely. My friend Asha Frost is a wonderful Indigenous medicine woman in Canada. And she has this beautiful statement, words, beliefs from her elder, which is when you feel low, go lower. And that's something very counterintuitive, especially
Mm.
in American culture. When you suddenly feel tired, we grab for a coffee. When we're suddenly feeling a little vulnerable, we grab for potato chips, or we like perk ourselves up, or we fawn, or we make ourselves laugh or talk really fast. But rarely do we have any kind of modeling of when I feel soft, I soften more. Very rare, right? So when we feel constriction, the body is saying, I need to pause, and I'm pulling back from life, not for years, for like 2 minutes. It's not something that has to go on for weeks. It's like for 2 minutes, I just want to close my eyes and lay down and hold my chest. And that's all you do. And that's the titration, because if I use that constriction and I said, I can never be seen again, that's not titration. That's a whole other pendulum swing to the other side.
Mhm.
Or if I feel a constriction and I say, I'm going to push through this, I have something to do. Those are both big extremes. The middle for me is like, okay, for 3 minutes, I sit with this, then I do what I have to do, and then I sit with it when I'm done. And it's a swinging back and forth that builds resilience. And resilience is just the ability to be with activation, really, without being shut down. And we get there through these little tiny drop ins based on the constriction. The constriction for me is my teacher. Like when I feel that, that's the signal my body's at capacity. I need to support it. And then that actually creates more capacity versus pushing through.
I love the idea that it doesn't have to be this huge thing. You can take a few moments to honor that and release it. And as you guys were talking, I was thinking, like, this is really the difference that's been happening for me lately, even though I'm still having these big experiences with boundaries. It's not taking me out of life, and there's something that's been really different about it. Like, I haven't reached that burnout stage, and I think it is because I'm not trying to push my body to not be there and to be okay with it and be like, I should just be able to handle this. It really is like, I'll do the thing and then I lay down on the floor, and like, it might be like weeping, or shaking, or, and my partner came in and I just had to hold his hand and I was like, it's so much, it's so much. And then there was the being witnessed in that and just letting it move through. And then like 20 minutes passed and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the grocery
Yeah.
store,
Yeah.
and life
Yeah.
went on. And it's different than it used to be, where you get stuck in that place, or you push, 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 and then you're out at some point with the total exhaustion of the violating of your own boundary now, like you were talking about.
And that example is such a practical one because that's actually what makes this work sustainable. I don't know anyone, including myself, I did this early on, that just dives in trying to heal all their trauma like in 3 months, who can sustainably do that. It just doesn't work that way. And so we end up burning out or ignoring it completely. You end up getting sick, and then your sickness is speaking it for you. But that beautiful middle place, so I lay down, maybe I sob, maybe I stretch, maybe I fall asleep for 10 minutes. Like, who knows what happens in that? But supporting the constriction and letting it do its thing, it's just so practical and it's so accessible because you don't have to go on vacation or a retreat. It's just like 20 minutes I laid there and held it.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
I love it.
Me too.
Amazing. Really brings us back to the beginning when we were talking about that minimum effective dose and just being with what is present. That's where the magic is at. We don't have to go back and find it or keep picking the wound or chase the thing. We just have to be with what's present in the body and build the capacity in the nervous system little by little over time to be able to be present with those sensations and process through.
Absolutely. I have to say, not fawning at all. You two are such an amazing team because you like I watch you two pendulate back and forth to each other after I speak, and you just drop a beautiful question or a beautiful piece that keeps pushing it forward. Then the next person takes it. It just feels so silky. I just love it.
Oh,
Aw,
thank you.
Well done.
We
thank you
Well
so
done.
much
we
for
are
that.
we love our team.
Good job. Good job.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
seamless. It's really seamless.
Thank you for
Thank
that. That's
you.
very meaningful.
It really is. It really is. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to be respectful. Is there anything else you wanted to get out there, and or anything that you want to offer where people can find you?
Yeah, so I'm doing two more things this year. My last course of the year is on September 2nd. So I don't know if this comes out by then, but if it comes out before then, they can
I
register.
think
If
so.
not,
Okay.
they can get on the wait list for the next year. And then in December, I'm doing a retreat in Costa Rica, which I'm really excited about. So anyone that's like, I want to go to Costa Rica for Christmas, find me there. It's on my website. We're going to be there for a week, and
Okay,
it's going to
cool.
be pretty magical.
That sounds
That
amazing.
sounds magical.
You might be talking.
I might
You
I
might
might
be
be
talking
there.
to someone that
I would
wants to
love
be
to see
there.
there. That'd
Yeah.
be amazing.
You
Yeah.
had a workshop
Amazing.
recently. It was a one day in the Bronx. It might have just happened or it's coming up. What is it called? And I thought, my God, I wish he would come do that in Austin.
Yeah, I've gotten so many requests to come do that somewhere else because like
Yeah,
scattered around the world every so I might do a little tour someday of that. But
great.
it's called it's called Embodied Performer. It's about how
Yes.
to be seen without leaving your body. And it's
Yeah.
been when you were talking earlier, I forget which one of you was saying it, but I was getting the real felt. Oh, it was you, Elizabeth. You were saying about what you read. I think you read part of the body Embodied Performer, and I was getting kind of flashbacks to my breakthrough I had when I was trying to figure out why when I go on stage do I just completely panic and shut down. And my body had taken me back to these early experiences by the swimming pool. And because of my body and the way I had been born, I had so much dysphoria and shame around my body and how it looked. And I could feel when my body went on the stage, something about the lights, the crowd being higher than people. It mimicked how it felt being on the diving board and feeling really insecure and exposed. And that began the uncoupling after maybe 5 years. Again, long time with one thing. I can finally go on a stage and completely feel my body the entire time, which I never thought would happen. So I thought I have to teach this. So I'm doing a weekend in Brooklyn. And yes, I want to do other places. This is like the pilot. So I'll tell you how it goes.
Okay, great, great.
Okay.
We're here for it.
I
That's
love
right.
Austin too. So that sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can get
Amazing.
weird.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you
too.
so
Thank
much.
you.
You.
Really appreciate it.
It's really such a pleasure to be with you again. So thank you so much.
We'll
You
let you
too.
know when everything comes out, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting that Luis brings up the time of 5 years that it took for him to heal that pattern. And I think that's really people come into this healing process. It's like, I'm going to heal this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to change this pattern. It's like we have to stay in this daily, consistent practice. We have to find the ways that cultivate safety for us so that we can stay on the journey to healing something. It just because we decide I'm going to heal this response, I'm going to heal this protective output, it just doesn't happen like boom. It takes sometimes years to unfold.
Absolutely. I mean, as I was just talking, we've obviously been on this path for a long time, and there are still these moments, there are still certain outputs. I still have autoimmune flare ups sometimes. And yes, everything gets fewer and further between, or I can navigate through it and it doesn't last as long. And I know there's another side. But some of the most healing stuff that I have experienced is the ability to accept my body where it's at, and not like to understand that the body is going to move slower than my cognitive mind might decide, and to just be in this place of like, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm staying on the path, and it will unfold as it's supposed to, and I'm not going to continue to put the pressure on myself or violate my body's own boundaries that it's communicating with me, and let my body and my nervous system drive the pace of that healing. Know that it fluctuates. Some days I have more capacity, some days less. Like you said, all of that is a huge part of actually healing. And it's important for people to know that that's the experience that we all have. Nobody just is better.
No, that's a falsity. So if you want to join us in cultivating your own daily practice, finding safety in your nervous system so that you can sit with your own constrictions, then please join us at rewiretrial.com. You'll get a free 2 weeks of membership site with us, and we would love to see you there.
Absolutely.